Hey, this is Tim, Southwest Ohio Bee, your common sense beekeeper. I told you I'd be back soon. Surprise, here I am already. I really wanted to wait a couple more weeks before doing this specific video. Early, mid-February is when I had hoped to get into the subject. But looking around over the last couple weeks, we got past that cold spell and we're in a really warm period now. And it's not just that we're in a warm period. I noticed my maple tree is budding already. It's the end of January and the maple tree is still budding. Now that might be common if you're down south somewhere. That's not so common here in this part of Ohio. Not that I've noticed anyhow. So I wanted to get into this subject because I think it's very important for a lot of beekeepers. I see beekeepers taking victory laps right now because we had that horrible cold spell, that Arctic blast for a week, 2 weeks, and bees survived. So people are saying, yes, I got them through the cold spell. It's all downhill from here. If that was only the case, that's why I'm here speaking today, because it's not really downhill. The easiest part of beekeeping, overwinter beekeeping, is now past us. Just in case you didn't catch that, I said the easiest part of overwintering bees has just passed us. So that means that the tricky stuff is still ahead. You say, but Tim, it's warming up. It's almost spring. You know, we got through the Arctic blast. That's, again, the easy part. Bees can survive that pretty well, assuming they don't have drafts and have water dripping, you know, the standard stuff. A lot of varroa issues. Bees get past that, not a problem. What bees have a problem with is when the weather starts warming up. Yes, weather warming up can be a problem for bees, and I'll explain why that is. When it's really cold, Arctic blast, whatever you call it, sub-zero temperatures, the bees are clustered really tight. They are not using a lot of resources at that point. So if you've got plenty of stores in here, you got fondant, if you got sugar bricks, you know, the bees are fine because they're not eating much of that stuff during that Arctic blast. When it warms up now into the high 40s, the 50s, and beyond, the bees start getting really active. And when the bees get really active, they need to eat. Well, here's a conundrum now. You've got active bees, you have hungry bees, but there's no food out in the environment. And to make matters worse, on nice days, the bees are flying out of here. They are scouring the entire area looking for things because that's what they do. They're not finding a lot. There's nothing in bloom. There should be pretty much no pollen out there this time of year. So they're using additional energy on top of that. So, believe it or not, when it warms up, a lot of bees will starve to death. Yes, they do starve to death when it's warming up. So when you just think, hey, I made it through, maybe not. It's time to make sure you have food on that hive. Again, whether it's fondant, whether it's sugar brick. I read a recent article in American's Bee Journal where someone was feeding heavy syrup and having fantastic overwintering success by having heavy syrup on the hives. Now, they didn't explain exactly what heavy syrup is. Is that 2 to 1? Is that 3 to 1? Is that pro sweet? what that was. They really didn't say, other than it was really heavy syrup. So there's a lot of methods you can use or try out there to make sure you have food on that hive. Now sometimes you get to spring. I mean, real spring. I mean, it's in the 70s and so forth. You finally break open your hive. You're looking in there. Bees are all gone. They're all dead. Let's just say they're all dead. You're going through that hive, and you say, "But there's honey right here. There's honey right here. Why are the bees starving to death if there's all this honey inside the hive, or I have fondant on it, or I have a sugar brick on it? Why did my bees starve to death? Well, Varroa must have killed them." Well, that's probably pretty good bet. However, Varroa don't kill all bees necessarily. It's a good fall too. Fall guy. Let's blame the Varroa mites, and they do kill a lot of bees. But sometimes your bees just plain starve to death. Okay, let's go back. But there was food all over the place inside that hive. So it couldn't have been starving to death because there was food. Well, here's what happened. Is during the day it's 50 degrees. These bees are out there flying. They're moving about the hive. Suppose you have 2-3 boxes, 2.5 boxes on that hive. So you have make sure you have plenty of store. So you've got a big, nice, tall hive for the winter time. Well, the bees are everywhere on there, looking for resources, gathering resources within the hive. They're out in the environment gathering resources. Then what happens? Nighttime comes around and temperature falls to 25 degrees. Very common this time of year. The bees slow down when it gets cold. So they don't get back in their tight cluster, or they form multiple clusters is what they do. Well, the problem is some of those clusters aren't big enough. And generally when it gets really cold, the bees on the outside of the cluster are the ones that fall off dead. They take the brunt of the hive by protecting the inner core of bees. So if you have multiple clusters, or the bees are caught outside the cluster when it gets really cold, you're going to lose bees. And as the hive gets smaller and smaller and smaller, each day this happens. 50s during the day, 25 at night, 60 during the day, 20 at night. It's going to be repetitive, and you're going to have a smaller and smaller cluster, assuming they can even get totally clustered. And they're going to get to the point where they cannot sustain themselves. There's not enough of a cluster to keep them warm, and the bees die. That's why you often see a hive with a deadout and all kind of resources still in there. Could have it been Varroa? Absolutely. It also could have been the bees just didn't survive the warm and cold spell. Where I'm going with this is, number one, make sure you have plenty of food, whatever you choose to have on that hive. Number one, consider this emergency feed. This is what we call emergency feed. They should have plenty of honey in here, but you have emergency feed on here too, whether it's sugar brick, syrup, fondant, whatever you choose to have on there. Have that emergency feed there. That's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do, and it's a little late this year to do this, you do this pre-winter, but I'm telling you anyway, is to have smaller boxes. You want a very full hive in a smaller container. You don't want to have all those extra containers on there. If you find you decided, hey, I want to keep a ton of honey on my hive, and you've got a couple deeps and then a couple of supers on top of that, just to make sure they have plenty, that's way too much space. That is way too much space. On a warm day, I would even remove one of those supers in that case. Don't like to manipulate until it gets spring really gets here, but in that case, I think I might do that. Reduce them down. They have less room to travel, less room to move around that hive. They're closer to a cluster when they need to be in a cluster. So That's pretty much concludes what I wanted to discuss today, is the dangers of late winter, early spring. Keep food on those hives and watch them closely, because just because you got through the cold, really cold weather, doesn't mean that the bees still can't die off. And this is the time when most hives do die, is in the late winter, early spring. So that's all I have right now. Please leave comments, questions down below. Don't forget to subscribe, thumbs up, share the videos if you like them. I appreciate that. Getting real close to that 1,000 mark in subscribers. Thank you very much for that. So that's pretty much all I have for today. This is Tim, Southwest Ohio Bees, your common sense beekeeper. You have a fantastic day.